Hey guys, we're going to begin Unit 3 today. Unit 3 is all about the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. If you remember, whenever we looked at the Constitution, I said we're going to go over Articles 1, 2, and 3 later. Well, this is later. Let's jump right in. The United States Congress is considered one of the most democratic governing bodies. Article 1, which is the longest article of the Constitution, defines Congress and defines the terms and the powers of Congress. Now, what I have here is a link, and this link takes you to a paper about the makeup of our current Congress, the demographics. And it's kind of interesting to see just where do our representatives come from? What are they like? What's their education, background, race, gender, ethnicity? And it's interesting, like I said, to look at this. One of your assignments coming up real soon, actually tonight, is to graph some information about the makeup of Congress. One of the issues that the Founding Fathers had is they wanted to create this balance between a democracy where the citizens, the common citizens' views were represented, but it was also balanced with the elite or upper class. And so what they did is they came up with this Congress, this bicameral legislature. The Great Compromise did this. The House is based on population, and then the Senate is based on equal representation. We talked about this, the Virginia plan, New Jersey plan, and we have the Connecticut Compromise. Each house has its own responsibilities, own separate responsibilities. The House is more active and rambunctious, while the Senate is more insulated from public opinion because of their longer terms. The congressmen have typically a smaller geographic district, while senators represent the entire state. And so senators face a more diverse electorate, while the House of Representatives typically has a smaller group to focus on. We know that originally the senators were not elected by the people, that the senators were selected or elected by state legislatures. James Madison was a big proponent of this bicameral legislature. One of the reasons why he was for it is he believed a bicameral legislature prevented or would prevent a rushed law. He said, and I quote, "It doubles people's security by requiring the concurrence of two distinct bodies." And so with it, if you think about it, with a unicameral, once it's passed, done. But now with a bicameral legislature, each house has to take it up, so it has two sets of eyes looking at it, and it kind of slows things down. And one of the things I mentioned earlier in the school year is that the government is big, and they set it up purposely big and purposely slow to prevent anything from being rushed. Let's look at some constitutional details. The House of Representatives, they face a 2-year term. So every 2 years, they are up for election or re-election. And this puts a lot of focus on their representatives because they know the next election is always right around the corner. And they have to focus on public opinion. Otherwise, they're going to be voted out in a couple months. The House has 435 members. This is not set in the Constitution. Nowhere in the Constitution are you going to find the number 435. However, it was set in 1913. There's 435 members. There's been a couple of exceptions whenever Hawaii and Alaska became states. They were the size of the House temporarily increased beyond 435. And then when the next census ran its course or came around, then they went back to 435. Each district represents about 700,000 people. The qualifications, you have to be 25 years old, be a U.S. citizen for the 7 years, and reside in the state which you represent. Now, notice it doesn't say you must be a resident of your district. So theoretically, Jason Smith, our 8th congressional rep, he could live in Kansas City, theoretically. Why would we want to elect someone from Kansas City to represent Southeast Missouri, IDK? But that's constitutional. In 1929, the Reapportionment Act mandated that congressional seats become reapportioned according to the changes in the census figures. And we know the census occurs every 10 years, and based on those numbers, those 435 seats are divvied out. You want to see my puppy doggy? Come here. Come here. Come here. Here she is. Here's Allie. There you go, Allie. She's an old puppy. Old dog. She has her sweater on because it's cold. There you go, Allie. And so with the with the census, every state could add or lose. And if one state adds a seat, that means another state is losing a seat. In the Senate, each state gets 2 senators, so 50 times 2, there's 100 senators. What happens is, while in the House, every 2 years, all 435 are up for re-election. In the Senate, only a third of the senators are up for election every 2 years. So 2 years, 34 senators are up. 2 years later, 34 senators are up. 33, and then 2 more years after that, 33 senators are up for re-election. And that allows for continuity. Federalist 64, and I quote, says, "By leaving a considerable residue of the old ones in place, uniformity and order, as well as a constant succession of official information, will be preserved." And so instead of having all 100 senators up every 6 years, we have a third of them up every 2 years. What are the qualifications to be a senator? 30 years old, citizen for 9 years, and a resident of the state you represent. So you can see the qualifications for the Senate are just slightly tougher. Instead of 25, it's 30 years old. Instead of 7 years citizen, it's 9 years citizen. Now let's look at the powers of Congress. We've looked at the powers of Congress. This is Article 1, Section 8. Congress shall have the power to ... We also, those are called express powers or enumerated or delegated powers, whatever. And we also know Congress has implied powers. Before we get too much further into the powers of Congress, I want to take a look. I want to take you through the Constitution. Now, if you want, you can pull out a copy of the Constitution that I've given you earlier in the year, or you can follow along here. But I just want to go through Article 1 until we get to Section 8, which has the powers. So Article 1, Section 1, all legislative powers granted shall be vested in Congress of the United States, shall consist of a Senate and the House. So this is where we get the bicameral legislature. You look at Section 2, it's House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year, so every 2 years. Here are the requirements: 25 years, 7 years citizen, be a resident of the state. Talks about what happens if there's a vacancy. And then Section 5, Article 1, Section 2, Number 5, the House of Representatives shall choose their Speaker and other officers and shall have the sole power of impeachment. This is important. The House has the power to impeach. Section 3 is all about the Senate. Talks about 2 senators from each state. Talks about the age requirements. The president of the Senate is the vice president. He doesn't get a vote unless it's tied. Talks about the officers of the Senate. The Senate shall have the power to try all impeachments. Section 4 says the time, place, and manner of the election shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature. So that it's specifically saying the states have the power to run these elections. Section 5 talks about the how each house decides whether or not the person is qualified. And each house can have its own set of rules right here. Each house may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members. It talks about how they can expel a member. Has that ever happened? Yes. The House of Representatives has expelled members. It takes a 2/3 vote. Section 6 talks about how they get paid. Section 7 talks about just a few things with passing a bill, how a bill becomes a law. And we're going to talk about this later. Now we get to the powers of Congress. Article 1, Section 8, this list. We've talked about this before. We've looked at these are delegated powers. What I want to do is I just want to kind of break them up into different categories. Right here are the powers. And if you look at this chart, you can divide up the powers of Congress to peacetime powers and war powers. Take a look at this. You can pause it for a minute, but you can see this is one way of classifying the powers of Congress. If you want to look at another way of looking at, excuse me, if you want to take another way of looking at the powers, you can say monetary powers or financial powers. Congress has the power to tax. Article 1 also says that no money can be drawn from the Treasury without the approval of Congress. Congress appropriates the money it raises through taxes. Congress has the power to coin money. And so this is one set of powers. We have commerce powers. We know they have the power to regulate interstate commerce and how that's been a big use of government power. You wouldn't think interstate commerce would be that big of a deal, but the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that U.S. versus the Heart of Atlanta motel case, used interstate commerce. Obamacare was justified under the Commerce Clause. So it's quite a powerful tool that's regulating interstate commerce. Minimum wage, child labor laws, all those fall under the Commerce Clause. We have military powers and foreign affairs powers. Congress can raise an army, they can raise a navy, they declare war, they appropriate money to the military. Only Congress can declare war. And they specifically put that in there because they said, you know what, if we're going to go to war, the people better agree with it. We're not going to let the president, who is commander in chief, one person make that decision. Congress is going to make that decision. We have the War Powers Act of 1973. This is not in the Constitution. But what happened was in the 1960s, the United States got involved in Vietnam. And we got involved through a law called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. And the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution basically said, hey, President Johnson, do whatever you need to do to fight this war. It was literally a blank check. Congress said, President, do whatever you want. Do whatever is needed to fight communism in Vietnam. Well, we saw how we got bogged down in Vietnam, that the presidents had, bogged us down. And so the War Powers Act of 1973 was Congress's way to try to get some of that power back. They said, you know what, we were kind of wrong with the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution that said, hey, President, do whatever you need to do. And so with the War Powers Act, this gives the president 48 hours to engage in a conflict before notifying Congress. And then Congress then has 60 days, and they can extend it once for 30 days, to take positive action, which means they must give some sort of, quote, okay to the conflict. Now, this law, it's never been challenged in court. And a lot of people suspect that the War Powers Act is actually unconstitutional because the president is commander-in-chief of the military. And here's this law that's restricting what the president can do with the troops. No president has challenged it yet. No president wants to be that person that gets the War Powers Act declared unconstitutional. Congress also has implied powers. We know that Article 1, Section 8, Number 18, the Elastic Clause. We know the court case McCulloch versus Maryland and U.S. versus Comstock, which is a modern-day decision on implied powers. You can pause this for a second. If you look at some of these express powers, borrow money, collecting taxes, raise an army, this chart shows some implied powers of that. So go on and pause it, read through it. Got one more slide after this. Congress, while it's a bicameral legislature, while the House and the Senate do work together, they are similar. They are also two separate, distinct bodies. For instance, only the House can introduce a bill concerning revenue. So the Senate can't propose a bill to increase taxes. They can't do that. The House has to start it. Then they can receive the bill, and then they can change it, but they can't be the first to propose it. The House of Representatives selects the president if the Electoral College is unable to do so. The Senate selects the vice president if the Electoral College is unable to do so. So two separate responsibilities. The House has to start impeachment proceedings, and then only the Senate tries them. We know with President Trump being impeached, the House of Representatives voted to impeach him, so he was impeached. But then he had to be convicted, and they had a trial in the Senate. And he was not convicted. The Senate has the advice and consent power that almost all presidential nominations go through the Senate, and the Senate has to approve them, whether that's for ambassadorships or cabinet level positions or justices on the Supreme Court. The Senate has to give their okay. The House doesn't. The Senate has to approve treaties, a 2/3 vote. And then, like I said, the Senate tries officials for wrongdoings, for the impeachment. You can see here that while they're both part of the legislative branch, there are differences between the House and the Senate. I went through this kind of quick, but we've already talked about the powers of Congress. Some of these other constitutional pieces of information, really simple to understand, the age requirements, powers, etc. Until Wednesday, which I will be back. I will see you again later.